Hello and welcome to our elections special at Boom US Elections Simplified. As the name suggests, we're asking very basic and simple questions all through our series. And as we speak, millions of voters are lining up in the United States across all the time zones, the three time zones. Even in the Pacific Coast, in a couple of hours, voting time will begin. And by the end of today, that is in a few hours or about 10 or 12 hours, we'll have some inkling as to which way the tide is going to turn, or it might take several days depending on how tight this race is. And we at Boom, we're focusing on several interesting questions that are particularly intriguing for a non-American global audience. And some of the questions include focuses on polling and what is polling bringing to the table? What are the polls saying right now? What are the prediction engines that are being used? Are they using cutting edge modeling techniques? Are these modeling techniques, do they have flaws in them? So on and so forth. And to explore that and other questions, we have with us Yashwant Deshmukh. He's the founder, editor of CVoter, and he's a familiar face for us Indians. Thanks very much, Yashwant, for joining us, and welcome to Boom.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure.
My first question is, the polls are pretty tight, but I've been looking at some of these aggregated numbers, and they say that Joe Biden is about 52% slated for victory, and then Trump is given 48%. But whatever these polls are saying, my question is, are they reliable? Can we see a repeat of what happened in 2016? Have the techniques evolved to take care of more uncertainty and, of course, the number of biases and structural issues that come about when you do a poll?
Well, of course, they are reliable. I mean, there are limitations. When I say they are reliable, there are statistical limitations to any statistical survey that one may conduct. And it's a big misconception that polls were completely wrong in 2016. You see, 2016 also, all the polls, the aggregated numbers, even our polls, we were seeing that roughly about 3-point lead to Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump as far as the national vote share is concerned. And that's precisely what she got, about approximately 2.5% in national lead over Donald Trump. But the electoral college system is like that, that it takes winner takes all. And even after winning the popular vote, Hillary Clinton ended up losing the electoral college. So this is why it's so unpredictable at some times. It has happened in 2000 when Al Gore fiasco happened. We know for sure that Al Gore also won majority of the popular vote, but he lost the electoral college to George Bush. So these things have happened in the past, and because it was very fresh just 4 years back, this is why even after a very healthy lead of almost like 7-8 points in the polls, everybody is kind of a bit shaky that whether this lead will really translate as far as the lead of electoral college is concerned. That is the prime thing.
Yes, indeed. And before we go further, I'm going to go back a little bit and I'm going to toss you a slightly provocative comparison. Is polling, that is asking people for their opinion as to whether they're going to vote for such and such a candidate, is it like astrology, which is some people call an art or a pseudoscience, or is it more like astronomy?
Neither astrology, nor astronomy. It's a pure statistical exercise. You see, let me put it this way, that there are things which are certain. It's just when we feel that our expectation from a certain exercise goes beyond the limitations of that exercise. For example, the best possible polls, they also give you a statistical margin of error. Generally, talking about it's plus minus 3%. Even the best of the polls, they do it and say that our estimation is within the plus minus 3% of the estimates that we have done of the original. What could be the final result? Now, any state in America, or for that matter, even in India, any seat or state, wherever you look at it, as far as election polls are concerned, if the margin of victory or margin of lead of the winning party is more than 3% votes, then certainly you may pick up the winner correctly. But if the margin is less than 3% vote, then the polls are taken as an indicator in that direction, but one can never be sure of that because the poll margins are less than 3%. The leading party and the trailing party or the candidate person. So in 2016, the only problem was that there were big number of states, particularly the swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and many more out there, where actually the margin was touch and go. It was forget about 1%, it was in some points. Now, let's be honest, when that kind of slow margin game is there, then there is no estimation that can actually be correct. Where did they go wrong in 2016 was the fact that, for example, when UPI CVoter trends came in, we were very clear in that even though Clinton is winning the popular vote, we feel that it could be a toss-up as far as the Electoral College is concerned, because as per our data at that point of time, there were no less than 7 states where the margin was within the margin of error. So they could have gone either way. And while the rest of the polls, because of the herding, this is a trend, this is a term which generally is used with the confirmation bias,
Yes.
There are just way too many polls. And when all the polls are going in one direction, then the pollsters take a leaf of that and they are more confident about saying that. So rather than marking out the close states in US 4 years back, all of them, they herded towards saying that because the overall vote share is going towards Hillary Clinton, she is likely to win all these swing states, which unfortunately did not happen. Obviously, because their assessment was less than 1% and their margin of error was 3%. So for all practical purpose, they were trading in very thin. So I think that is something which they have learned, and they have been very clear. Even with a 5% margin of error, they are being very, very cautious and saying that this is a swing state now, or this is a gray area state where we don't really know which way. It is too close to call, as we call TCTC, too close to call. So right. If it is too close to call, then we say it. It has to be said the way it is, that it is too close to call, rather than sticking your neck out and giving that state to the one particular candidate, which should not
Definitely.
be
done. Indeed, there's a lesson in that for media as well, that always wants concrete answers, and a good answer to always say is we are not sure, or I don't know, or we shall see.
That's it. If you are not sure, that's what one is supposed to say, that I'm not sure.
Indeed.
That's it.
Absolutely. Yashwant, I want to ask you this follow-up question then. If there are biases and fallacies involved, confirmation bias and other biases, what are the areas that you might see that polling organizations or people who interpret polling organizations or the media may not be taking into consideration? I ask this specifically because we've heard of the silent Trump voter or the overrepresented Democrat. What are the sort of blind spots that one should look for?
Well, the spiral of the silence is a very age-old theory. It has worked in many places, and particularly in case of the conservative voters. I've seen that in UK elections many a times it has come into play. It is a historical fact, and there are research and documents after documents which have done with that. And similarly, right now they are saying that the spiral of the silence is working in favor of Trump, as they say. But I think the polling industry over there is grappling with more of methodological issues right now in terms of mode of surveys. We know for sure that in the developed countries, for quite some time, it was face-to-face interviews. Then for almost 50 years, it was telephonic interviews.
Yes.
But over the last 10 odd years, due to mobile telephony and due to the laws that one could not use the automatic machines to call in the mobile phones for survey purpose, there was a problem. Unlike India, where the calling party pays, and we don't have a problem in ethical issue in calling the respondents to directly on their mobile phone and asking questions. In US, there is a problem of a big number of surveys now shifting over to online methodology. Now, when I say online methodology, it clearly mentions that almost 99.99% of the online polls or the panels which are being run right now are of non-probability nature. They are done as a convenience, as a reverse sample, or as a panel which is like opt-in panel, but they are not random probability based. And that is where the problem is. After 2000, when I was doing the 2008 elections over there, and between 2000, we did 2008 on CATI, basically on the telephonic interviews. In 2012, by the time 2012 happened, that's the time when the economy also went down. The global economy downturn was there. It was an economic crisis. So there were budget cuts everywhere. In that duration, all of a sudden, I could sense that majority of the industry players started to shift lock, stock and barrel from telephonic operations to online honors, simply because it was a very, very cheaper option, cheaper alternative to work on, and cost-effective alternative to work on. But having said that, it also gauged in the possibility of covering a non-probability sample, which is unscientific in nature. So between 2012 and 2016, we realized and we figured out that big number of mainstream publications and polling organizations shifted because of the economic concerns criteria to online, and they figured out a better way of doing how to do checks and balances while doing online samples, because the world was going digital and that was the future is. But still they haven't figured out the right set of solution to that. We did the 2016 poll completely online, but that was a non-probability sample. However, somehow we realized that because our projection models were based core, our experience comes from India, where we are dealing with a zillion parties and a zillion caste groups and religion. I mean, our variables in Indian politics, like Bihar, for example, we are dealing with two data sets right now, one coming from Bihar and one coming from US. So think of it. I mean, you can understand it very well. In Bihar, for example, to analyze any one particular region or one district or one constituency per se, each and every constituency has a different caste analysis, caste group, minimum four parties to have a serious contest in, and then there are so many factors to check in. The sheer number of factors, from gender to age to economic background to education to caste to religion, and then their voting history for the four different political groups based on which caste candidate was given by which political party. Now, these variables, they run in hundreds while doing the analysis in Bihar. While in US, what are the factors? Either you are black or you are a white. In white, either you are a college graduate white, or one without the college degree, and then the blacks, and then the Hispanics, and a very, very small population of the Asian. So if you count that all in, what you are getting in only about 5 or 6 variables, vis-a-vis when you compare a Bihar seat, which would run into hundreds of variables. So even with a non-probability sample, our metrics probably worked better, because it was better coped to handle that kind of a non-probability sampling errors, as we may say. But this is not the thing which will work forever, because there would be confirmation biases and other things coming in. So the US polling industry,
it's a game of cat and mouse. They
are grappling.
Our technique
on one hand,
need
they
to
are
change
grappling with the new situation of the online panels and the random probability absence of random probability in it. On the other hand, they are having another set of problem because of the COVID. Because now you are dealing with 3 different universes. Universe number 1, the people who have voted already using the postal ballot. Universe number 2, who voted early but in person. And the universe number 3, who are voting today in person. So now there are 3 different universes, 3 different calls, and 3 different estimations. And on the top of it, you have to do a right balance of how much weightage, how much is to be given, and what part of the population is going to come out today. 4 years back, it was a 60-40 ratio. 60% who voted in person on the polling day, 40% who voted early. This time around, it is just the opposite. Very
Indeed,
likely 60 to 65% have voted early, and roughly 35 to 40% are likely to vote today.
that is an amazing statistic, because it's close to 100 million people have already voted, and I guess another 100 million out of the 300 million plus population is going to be voting today. That itself is interesting. And what you said, Yashwant, bringing in Bihar, and the fact that knowledge transfer is useful when you look at comparative perspectives from different countries, that is something I'm sure our viewers will appreciate. I personally appreciated it as well. Just the last couple of questions. Is there such a thing? We see in India that reliably the best polling is done by political parties who do not release the results to the public. Do we see a trend like that happening in the United States as well? Whereas it's not just the political parties or the Democrats or the Republicans, but also corporations who have spent their money, and they will not release these polls into the public. Do you see a trend happening like that there as well, and that they might perhaps be more accurate?
No. And unfortunately, that is not the case, because they are quite open about it. The pollsters, they clearly write Republican or Democrat in front of their names if they are partisan pollsters, but they very well, they give the numbers the way they get it, mostly. And right. The answer to the uncertainty, or answer to the finding solution of the polling, is basically doing more polls. In US or in UK and other advanced democracies, you see there are polls after polls done every day, day in and day out, week after week. So even there you have got an aggregator like Nate Silver, whose job is basically to aggregate hundreds of polls and give you a trend line. While in India, the less number of polls is basically creating more trouble. Because, for example, I'm giving you just an example, not to complain about our client.
No, we understand.
When was the last time you saw Bihar polls? That was 5 years back. Between then and now, there was zero polling in Bihar. And this is the problem. When you have 5-year gap between the polling trends, unlike the trackers that we do, but rest of the polling colleagues, they just do not get assignments to do that. Now, when you are unable to learn, first of all, whatever we learned from Bihar 5 years back cannot be implemented in Haryana, and whatever we learn in Haryana cannot be implemented in Jammu and Kashmir or Tamil Nadu. India is so diverse. And then once you have learned something 5 years back, between this 5 years gap, the demography changes, the generation changes, the issues change, and there's so much new thing to add on that there is hardly any scope to learn, make it better, and move on. So what happens in India, that due to lack of the polling, we are prone to replicating the errors as well, because there is nothing in between for us to fine tune. So answer to that problem is more polling. Media has to invest more in research, not just in election research.
No, that's interesting. We asked you about the US elections. You gave us insight into the Indian system as well, comparatively. Yashwant, we'll let you go. One question. What is your call? Who do you think?
Just a minute. I'm sorry. Sorry. I missed your question. I was
just going to say something else. But my question was, what is your take? What is your prediction?
Well, you know what? It might end up in too much of legality, because our data clearly shows that in the early voting trends across the US, Joe Biden has won majority of those votes, almost like 60-40 split in that way. While those who said that they intend to vote today, the split was just the other way around. It was roughly about 65, 35, 55, 45, 60, 40 across different states. So what is happening here, that those who are in the line today, those votes are pro-Trump votes in huge margin. Those who have already voted, they are pro-Biden votes by huge margin. Now, technically speaking, in legal terms, the least objectionable vote is the vote of those who are standing there in the line today. There would be no legal hassle and no problem, no question mark on that. Second best scenario would be for those who voted early but in person. They will not be question mark. But maximum legal problems are going to arise with those votes who have voters who have used postal ballots, because each state has different law. When should they receive the postal ballot? Which mark should be there? What kind of date mark should be used? And there are going to be hundreds of legal cases across US from tonight onwards, basically. So this is where it is gonna get struck. Trump is going to win today's vote. That means in person today's vote. Biden is likely to win big time all the postal and early voting vote. But in between these three universes, I believe, genuinely believe, that Trump and his campaign, by virtue of these in-person votes being counted early in many states, they are going to openly declare their victory, which will not be the case. Because suppose if Trump leads here, and the moment you start counting postal ballot, this lead will come down and Biden's lead will go up. But provided he allows to happen that, if God forbid he leads in the in-person vote today and he puts in legal problems, legal tussles where they end up putting obstacles in counting of the postal ballots, then we are going to see a really long legal battle out there, which would actually jeopardize this entire process. And this is what everybody is fearing. This is what we know kind of way. It's unless by miracle, if in today's vote also Joe Biden starts winning by huge margin, and even the today's in-person votes start giving you trends which would say that, oh, Biden is sweeping everywhere, and he is likely to sweep further because of the postal ballots, which in any case are pro-Democrats historically. So if that happens, that is a different scene. But that's a miraculous scenario. So and everybody is fearing is a legal logjam actually out there, which is not going to be very sophisticated, and which is not going to be very pleasant for any person who appreciates democracy.
Yes, we'll start knowing in a few hours. You've touched upon many topics, Yashwant. Thanks very much for your time and your perspective, which has proved to be invaluable. We'll let you go. Thanks very much. And I'm going to quickly summarize what Yashwant said, which is that he spoke about the legal challenge. President Trump has said he will not accept it, and he might go the legal way. He's also said he might declare or call the election early. And one thing, Yashwant, as you're leaving, that has struck me always is America doesn't have an election commission. So the people who actually declare the election is probably it's the media.
It's 3,000. You will be surprised, because I am a certified election administrator in that system. I have studied that along with all the election officials in US. There are 3,000 plus counties and state laws and counties laws. There is no central system, and the ballot is not one. Please remember, in the US, actually there could be hundreds of ballots. The presidential ballot is just one question. Whom do you vote for the president? But there is Senate race, Congress race, and there are local races, and including the very, very small council question, whether there should be a children park here or not. So there are hundreds of ballots and hundreds of legal ways of challenging those ballots. So it is federal, but no, it's not really the more you look at the US system, the more you realize how good our elections are. That's the funny part of it.
Yeah, that's a perfect note on which to end this discussion. Thanks so much, Yashwant.
Pleasure.